welcome back to my channel. I feel really tired today, so sorry if I close my eyes a lot. I don't know, I just haven't been sleeping that well lately, the last sort of 3 nights, and last night, you know, like when you just can't get to sleep and you're just like lying there for like ages, and it seemed to be at least 12:30 before I actually fell asleep, probably later than that, because I hit the pillow. I went to bed at about like 10:40, as I always do. I go to bed at exactly the same time each night, but it took me ages to get sleep, and I was just lying there, and I just wasn't getting to sleep. I don't know why, my brain just, I wasn't even like thinking about anything, I was just lying there, and I just didn't get to sleep. Yeah, it's not nice. So I am quite tired. And I know I won't be sleeping well tonight because of fireworks and because it's like, you know, New Year, I never sleep well. So yeah, lots of caffeine will be needed tomorrow. Hopefully I'll sleep into the morning, we'll just have to see. And hopefully, yeah, it's just, I was sleeping alright the last week, it's just the last couple of nights, for some whatever reason I just have not been sleeping well. Anyway, this is a bit of an off the cuff video, and I'm sorry I did say I might film another video last week, but I never got round to it in the end. I hope you forgive me because Christmas and everything, you know, I just never got round to it, and it's all a bit over the place at the moment. So I haven't really been able to plan my usual videos because this is an off the cuff video. I'm hoping to film in 2 installments, so I'm hoping to film again tomorrow or maybe on Thursday. So it's a bit different this week, but as I said, everything's a little bit up in the air at the moment because of like Christmas and the New Year. But I'm still obviously filming because, you know, it's an important part of my routine. It's just a little bit different, you know, and I might have to film on a few different days potentially. I can't give you an exact plan just because everything's a bit all over the place at the moment. But yeah, I wanted to talk, obviously I do want to show you what I got at Christmas. I want to talk to you more about how I spent Christmas, because I know one of you was keen for me to talk about that, and I do very much intend to talk about that because I like to give you a rundown a lot, of course, and I like to show you what I got at Christmas as well. So it is in the pipeline, so don't worry, I will be talking about that. But in today's video, because it's been a lot on my mind lately, and because I talked about it in the last video as well, I wanted to carry on really where I left off, where I was talking about my thoughts on autism and neurodiversity for movement. So as I was saying in my previous video, neurodiversity is very much a kind of buzzword at the moment, very much like in vogue. I think even more, it's really taken off actually, I would say, in the last couple of years, because even when I got diagnosed back at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, when I was going through the diagnosis, it didn't seem to be so much out there as it is now, this stuff about neurodiversity. And when I first heard about it, it sounded all like really good and positive, as I was telling you in my previous video, but again, parts of it just did not sit comfortably or resonated with how I experience autism. So neurodiversity essentially portrays autism as just a natural variation, not just autism but other sort of like neurodevelopmental conditions that are often kind of like put on this wider like neurodiversity spectrum. I'm not particularly keen on that idea either, but I won't go into it now because I want to focus on autism. But they put other conditions, you know, certain learning difficulties, dyspraxia and stuff like that, they put it all on this same sort of like spectrum sort of thing, even though these conditions are actually they can obviously overlap, and many people will have more than one condition, that's true, but they are very different conditions at the same time. But autism seems to be kind of like at the forefront of this idea of neurodiversity. And so yeah, so it portrays autism essentially as a sort of like positive thing that should be celebrated, and yeah, and while of course, you know, I think it's important not to kind of like just dwell on the negative and to kind of bury oneself in doom and gloom, and I'm not that sort of person at all, you know, I'm very sort of like matter of fact about things. I guess I'm a kind of like realist, you know, I try and just get on with life to the best of my ability. I try and find meaning where I can in life and just carry on the best I can, and that's always how I've dealt with stuff, in a kind of very matter of fact way. So I'm not a negative person, but at the same time I don't like to paint things rosy just for the sake of painting things rosy. I don't want, you know, and I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. So I can only really talk about it from my own personal perspective because that's the only perspective I know, and obviously everyone's got different experiences, but I do feel that the neurodiversity movement does tend to airbrush and sanitize autism a lot, and it tends to overlook or silence and stereotype the perspectives of people who don't fit into the mould, into the neurodiversity way of seeing the world, I guess, into the movement's way of seeing the world. Because the fact, neurodiversity is a fact, that all brains are different, that's an incontrovertible fact. No one's going to argue against that because it's true. But the movement takes that fact and kind of creates a whole spin on it. And it's the spin on that fact, the movement, is what I take issue with. At least it's the most extreme manifestations of the movement, because, sorry, I'm speaking without notes, so bear with me if I'm a little bit all over the place today. Now, so the neurodiversity movement, it tends to focus very heavily on the on the social model. And what that means is that they see for disability, the disabling aspects of autism, they tend to explain as very much a product of society and how society is organised and structured. So the idea being that if society was structured in a more autism-friendly way, that the disability would, in the most extreme cases, I think it's only a minority of neurodiversity advocates who would argue that the disability would completely go away. They do exist, but I think they're quite a marginal group in the neurodiversity movement. But most argue that the disability would become negligible, and it wouldn't really be much in evidence if society was restructured to become completely autism-friendly. Now, there are several issues that I take with this. First of all, is such a society ever going to be possible? Now, I am, as you probably do know, because I've done it just based upon my other videos, in terms of my sort of political views, I am on the left of the political spectrum. So by that I mean that I do think a society has a really big role to play in our lives. I 100% disagree. As Thatcher once put it, there's no such thing as society. I completely disagree with that. Society has a really big role to play in our lives. Our whole experience is structured by the society that we live in. No man's an island. We all live together in society. So obviously, the way society is structured, is obviously going to either exacerbate someone's disability or reduce the extent of someone's disability. I agree with that. So I agree with the neurodiversity advocates when they talk about the social model from that perspective. I agree with them. But where I take issue with them is this idea that somehow if we had this perfect society, which at the moment is really just a utopia, but if we had this absolutely perfect society, that the whole disability would just completely vanish. And that's where I disagree with them, because I think that as much as I agree with the social model, and I think it's a very important aspect that shouldn't be ignored, I do think that it's important not to take the social model too far. The medical model, this idea that disability is innate and impairment is innate within the person, that it's all the person's fault, and that society just carry on as it is currently, and the person has to change and do all the hard work, or the person has to be fixed in some way. That's like the medical model in a very crude sort of nutshell. The medical model obviously had its problems by putting all the blame on the individual. Obviously, actually blame is the wrong word. No one's exactly to blame, but sorry, I'm speaking without notes, so forgive me if I say something that isn't correct. Blame's the wrong word. No, what I mean is that the medical model it suggests that the person is somehow completely wrong and sort of needs to sort of change in some way, sort of thing. That obviously had its problems, and because it lets society off the hook. And obviously, it goes without saying, a society that is more autism friendly is going to mean that an autistic person is going to be able to flourish more in society and have a better quality of life. And that's something I'm all for. Obviously, as an autistic person, something that I would advocate for, making society more autism friendly. So I'm all for, I don't think anyone, unless, I can't think of anyone, be a very weird person, who would be against trying to make society a better place, to better for disabled people. But my position, essentially, I think, is quite a balanced one, actually, because I think that the social model and the medical model need to exist together. It's not about seeing them as separate. They both interact. And I think it's also quite an individual thing. So it depends what type of autism you've got. Some people with autism will be more affected, will be more innately disabled, as it were. And while, of course, making society more autism-friendly is still going to benefit them, and it's important to do that, they're still going to be very disabled no matter what society we live in. They're going to be very dependent on other people. They're going to find it really hard to make relationships just because of the innate core impairment. That's not going to go away. Making society better is obviously a good thing and is going to reduce the level of suffering, but it's not going to get rid of their innate impairment at all. For other people with autism, who might, have more, shall I say, independence potential, the social model might apply to them more, and that creating that better, more autism-friendly society might reduce their disability to such an extent that they barely notice their disability, or they can have a really, really good life. But that's at the other extreme, and these are two extremes. I would say most people with autism are somewhere in the middle, where the social model is important, but the medical model also has a part to play. But obviously it depends what type of autism you have, and it's a very individual thing. I think the problem with the neurodiversity movement is it does tend to focus very heavily on very able autistics who are most going to benefit from the changes that they want to bring into, that are most going to benefit from the social model framework, as it were. And then, of course, so if you have a type of autism that is kind of more innately disabling, I say this very kind of cautiously, because I'm not. It's hard to find the exact words to put this, but clearly some people are more disabled than others. I know some people disagree with that, and I 100% disagree with the idea of low functioning, high functioning. I think that's completely the wrong way of articulating it. But certainly some people are more disabled than others. I'm less disabled than someone who needs 24/7 care and is 100% dependent on their carers. But at the same time, I'm more disabled, say, than someone like Chris Packham. I'm never, do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like there are degrees of disability. That's not diminishing anyone's problems or struggles, because everyone's got their own struggles, but there are still degrees of disability. Not all autistics, for example, need to rely on benefits. Some do, because there are degrees of disability, okay? I can't work, for example. Other autistics can. There are degrees of disability. And I think the thing with the neurodiversity movement is it does tend to focus very heavily on those who are very, very able, and people of the ilk of Chris Packham, Alan Gardner, people like that, autistics who have this potential to maybe go and do, who have maybe just, it's really hard to put this into words, but autistics who are just kind of more able to access society, but just with a little bit more tweaking or a bit of adaptations, and then they can go and, pretty much not be that disabled, as it were. But if you're autistic and you do have more sort of challenges, then and you question the neurodiversity movement, you say, hang on a minute, but actually I have these innate disabilities that are going to be there no matter what society we live in. Neurodiversity, some people in the neurodiversity movement can get very, very defensive, and what then happens is that your perspective then gets kind of silenced. I've experienced this myself on Twitter and other platforms. Your perspective can then get silenced, and they also often stereotype you. By that I mean that they tend to kind of say, oh, you must be depressed, or you must be really negative, or you need to go and have therapy to change your perspective. You must have had a really bad childhood, things like that. So they sort of stereotype your experience. And of course, for me, that's completely not true. I had a very happy childhood, generally speaking. Obviously, my time at school wasn't, particularly secondary school, was crap. But my actual childhood, before I became aware of my difficulties, was a good childhood, And I'm not a negative person, and I'm not depressed. Some people who are critical of neurodiversity movement might happen to be depressed as well. But it's being critical of neurodiversity movement is not because someone's depressed. It's a genuine perspective, and to explain it away as, oh, they must be depressed, it's kind of a form of gaslighting in a way. It's kind of like making it out like they don't have a case that it's because they're coming at it from, you know, a position of mental ill health or something. And that's silencing and stereotyping, and I'd say a form of gaslighting, and actually can be really deeply hurtful and can end up making you feel even more alienated than originally. And some people in the neurodiversity movement I've experienced this. I mean, I hope it's a minority. I mean, everyone in the neurodiversity movement is very, very different. You know, it covers a broad swathe of people, and I'd have to say that many in the neurodiversity movement I probably would actually agree with. But there are some in the neurodiversity movement who are very, very hell-bent on portraying autism in this very one-dimensional way as like a really positive thing, and by doing that they silence people who actually might disagree with that perspective. And I think all perspectives are important, but you've got to come from a perspective, from a position that you can only really ever talk about your own type of autism, and autism affects people in so many different ways, and by kind of like having this monolithic narrative only focused on what's on the positive and assumes that everyone must be in favour of neurodiversity, and that if you're somehow against it you're aggressive or reactionary, that is just not healthy and ends up really alienating people. Okay, so we're going to move on to video number 2 now, because I want to carry on talking about this in video number 2. So moving on to video number 2 now.